It's Jane from My Govanian, and today I want to talk about Éowyn. Éowyn undergoes the most, if not one of the most significant changes in the Lord of the Rings narrative. When we first meet her, she's really sad, she feels limited by her gender, she's having very dark thoughts, and enthusiastically, at the end, she enters into a battle in which she accepts the idea that she will die. At the end of The Lord of the Rings though, she completely softens, she renounces battle and glory and instead accepts the idea of healing and gentleness and Faramir's love. I can't think of another character in Lord of the Rings who undergoes a similar or a comparable change. Of course we have characters who change and develop, like Merry and Pippin. They grow up, they gain maturity, they gain confidence throughout the narrative. And other characters change too, like we have Gimli and Legolas who gain respect for each other's races and develop a lifelong friendship. But those pale in comparison to Éowyn's transformation. I think the other character whose transformation comes the closest to Éowyn is that of Boromir. When we first meet Boromir, he's of course very arrogant, very stubborn, and could not fully comprehend he couldn't fully comprehend why destroying the ring was the way to go. But at the end he realizes his mistake and he repents.
My captain. My king.
Even if I compare Éowyn to the many characters from the First Age that make up the Silmarillion, we don't see this theme of change and embracing a new version of yourself. Unless it's staring me in the face and I'm completely missing a character who's kind of similar to Éowyn, which is possible because I've only read the Silmarillion once. There isn't one Valar, elf, dwarf, or man from the First Age or from the beginning of days who fully changes their mind about how they wish to live their lives. Well, there's Melkor to Morgoth, but even before the name change, he was a terrible person through and through. One character who had somewhat of a desire for a greater existence is perhaps Meglin's mom. She left her home in Gondolin and ended up with an elf named Eowyn, which was not exactly the plan, but the idea of wanting to change her situation is present. We kind of also see this with Galadriel, in the First Age, she initially one of the reasons why the reason she wanted to leave Middle Earth was to perhaps, reign over a kingdom of her own. Which is why she followed Fëanor all the way to Middle Earth. That was her aspiration, and she does get that once she gets it. She arrives in Middle Earth, she does rule Lothlorien, but I don't know, I don't think it's exactly what she wanted. It seems like she wanted something greater. Those are just two characters from the First Age who kind of demonstrate a desire for a different kind of life, but their aspirations do not have the same weight as Éowyn's desire to live a greater life. So all of this to say, a really long way to say that this is what I think makes Éowyn unique, and this is why I'm gonna be talking about her today. So our first introduction to Éowyn is in Book 3, Chapter 6, and it's in the chapter entitled King of the Golden Hall. I'll go ahead and read this introductory paragraph of the character. This is the moment when Gandalf and company enter the Golden Hall to release Theoden from Grima Wormtongue's manipulations and lies. It reads as follows. It's not very long. Very fair was her face, and her long hair was like a river of gold. Slender and tall she was in her white robe, girt with silver, but strong she seemed, and stern as steel, a daughter of kings. Thus Aragorn for the first time in the full light of day beheld Éowyn, Lady of Rohan, and thought her face fair and cold, like a morning of pale spring that is not yet come to womanhood. What we're told here, or how Aragorn perceives Éowyn, is that she is a beautiful Rohirric noblewoman, but she has a particular sadness and sternness about her, and those emotions go beyond the reality that Rohan and much of Middle-earth is at war. What is also telling about this paragraph is the last bit, is when Aragorn says she's like a morning of pale spring that is not yet come to womanhood. I find this interesting. We learn in Appendix B that Éowyn was born in the year 2995 of the Third Age. The event from the Two Towers and the Return of the King take place in 3009 of the Third Age, so if my math is correct, she's 24 years old. Physically speaking, Éowyn is a full-grown woman during the events of the War of the Ring. I didn't come across anything specific in Tolkien's work about the rites of passage of Rohirrim women, but she is certainly old enough to get married, which suggests that she is physically mature at 24 years old. I could not pinpoint the year of her wedding to Faramir, but I did find a moment when her and Faramir get engaged, and we get this in Book 6, Chapter 6, entitled Many Partings. And this chapter Tolkien tells us that Éowyn and Faramir were officially, and I love the word he uses, troth-plighted. Troth-plight is an archaic word for betrothal, which is a mutual promise or contract for a future marriage. So this suggests that marriage was right around the corner for Éowyn, and no one made a big deal or said anything that, oh my gosh, she's too young to get married, because she's in her early 20s. So if we are to assume that Aragorn isn't referring to, when he says coming to womanhood, if he's not referring to it in the physical sense, we can then look at it from the perspective that she has still a lot to learn, or that a large transformation is on the horizon for this character. This makes sense because when we first meet Éowyn, she is knee-deep in an existential crisis. In fact, she's very much suicidal, but we don't really get this just by watching the film, because we don't, like, in the film, it doesn't take us into the minds of the character like it does in the book. Tolkien brings us into her thoughts, and when we pay close attention to the dialogue, we see that her thoughts are very dark. A prime example of this is in the passage when Aragorn informs her that he must go to the paths of the dead. We see this in Book 5, Chapter 2, entitled The Passage of the Great Company. The dialogue between Aragorn and Éowyn is worth reading, so I'm going to. It's not very long. Aragorn, she said, why will you go on this deadly road? Because I must, he said. Only so I can see my hope of doing my part in the war against Sauron. I did not choose the path of peril, Éowyn. Were I to go where my heart dwells, far in the north, I would now be wandering the fair valley of Rivendell. For a while she sat silent, as if pondering what this might mean. Then suddenly she laid her hand on his hand. You are a stern lord and resolute, she said, and thus do men win renown. She paused. Lord, she said, if you must go, let me ride in your following, for I am weary of skulking in the hills, and wish to face peril and battle. So here, we see that Aragorn goes to the path of the dead because he must. But Éowyn seems to want to go because it presents an opportunity to fight, and also an opportunity to die. At this point, she had gotten very sick and tired of watching the men of Rohan ride to battle and die, but get glory as she has to stay home. Remember that Éowyn is a Shieldmaiden of Rohan. She knows how to fight, and we see this in the exchanges that ensue between the two. This exchange is an incredible, it's my favorite Éowyn moment actually. It's an incredible moment for Éowyn's character. Éowyn does not back down and really lays it hard on Aragorn. She tells him about a lot of the things that were driving her crazy, and I'll read some of the lines she throws at him because they're really fantastic. Shall I always be left behind when the riders depart, to mind the house while they win renown, and find food and bed when they return? But I am from the house of Earl, and not a serving woman. I can ride and wield blade. I do not fear either pain or death. Aragorn asks her what she fears, to which she replies, a cage, to stay behind bars until youth and old age affect them, and all chance of doing great deed is gone beyond recall or desire. She also says another interesting line. I'm gonna read it right now, but remember it because I'm gonna come back to it. Too often have I heard of duty, but I am of the house of Earl, a Shieldmaiden, and not a dry nurse. Remember this? We'll get back to it. So it's pretty clear that Éowyn had been trained in fighting. She calls herself a Shieldmaiden. She calls herself a Shieldmaiden of the Rohirrim. I don't know if all the women in Rohan had this type of training, but I think Éowyn did because of the particular circumstances of her childhood. Her parents died tragically, after which she was taken in by her uncle, the king, and the uncle raised her as if it was his daughter, and she was raised kind of like royalty, meaning she was privy to special privileges. It's also worth noting that, well, as far as I know, or we know, or that I could tell, she didn't have a mother or a strong female figure or a female role model growing up. Theoden's wife died in the Third Age in the year 2978, so the queen was not around at the time she was adopted, and she grew up in a house full of boys at the time when the greatest battle that to ever befall on Middle Earth was being fought. Unfortunately for her, even if she knew how to fight and was eager to take up arms against the orcs of Mordor and defend the people who she really cared for, every time she asked to fight, she was told to stay home and wait because she is a woman, which she didn't like. Now, let's go back to that passage, that little quote I read earlier, when she told Aragorn about not being a dry nurse. This is interesting because it tells us that Éowyn is one of the main victims of Grima Wormtongue's poisonous counsel to her uncle Theoden. I think it's fair to assume that Grima knew of Éowyn's dislike of her gender role and used this to his advantage by convincing her that the Rohirrim are doomed to become nothing and that she will spend the rest of her life as a nursemaid to her uncle Theoden as he declines, and that she'll essentially never have the opportunity to do the great things that she wants to do. And I think this was part of Grima's plan, but essentially turning her into Theoden's nurse, he also breaks her spirit little by little, and by doing that, he probably assumed that this would kind of make Grima appear grand and desirable because he had a huge crush on her. So it's a bit because his little game essentially made Éowyn become even more suicidal. Grima's manipulation is part of the reason why Éowyn wants to ride with Rohan's armies and die on the battlefield. With this in mind, we can explain the reason why two things happen when she meets Aragorn. First thing that happens is she begins to develop a bit of a crush on him, which is super understandable in this situation. She's the White Lady of Rohan and single. And it's normal for her, she's a fair maiden, to be attracted to this heroic, smoking hot, mysterious stranger who is also destined to be a king. Also, Aragorn is part of the group of men who saved both her uncle and the entire kingdom from Saruman's influence, which is obviously very sexy. Her admiration for Aragorn, it's classic stuff. We see this kind of stuff in courtly love and in Arthurian romances. The second thing that happens when she meets Aragorn is what I kind of touched upon earlier. Aragorn had provided an escape from the dreary life in Rohan, and more importantly, Aragorn's arrival coincides with the removal of Grima, who is responsible for as far as she can see, Grima is responsible for her isolated existence in the Golden Hall. Unfortunately though, her relationship with Aragorn never materializes for several reasons, but one of those reasons is because, well, Aragorn was taken. He was already, I'll use Tolkien's word, he was already troth-plighted to Arwen. So when that happened, when Aragorn doesn't reciprocate her love, what little hope she had about a future with him extinguished, and as a result, she gives in to her despair, and instead of taking her own life though, she ties her hair back, she puts on some armor, and then she opts to die on the battlefield, and the hope there is that her death or actions on the battlefield would serve a greater good, which it does. The first positive thing that comes from her fighting in the Battle of Pelennor Field is that she contributes to the death of the Witch King of Angmar. About 1,000 years earlier, an elf named Glorfindel predicted that no man could kill the Witch King, which is true. So in the movie and in the book, mostly in the book, when Merry stabs the Witch King, the sword he used contained magic. And he didn't know this, but the magic in the blade broke the spell that protected the Witch King from harm. Once the Witch King was no longer protected, Éowyn was able to strike the deadly blow against the Witch King. So this fulfilled Glorfindel's prophecy, because the Witch King was in fact killed by a hobbit and a woman and not a man.
Die now.
I am no man.
Éowyn, like, she crushed her on the battlefield. Like, she kicked serious butt, and like, we get, like, in the movie we get like a lot of action from her, but like, we get so much more in the book. Like, in the movie we only get the, like, there's more, but like the one scene that stands out is that is the I am no man moment. But her full speech is pretty awesome, and I'm gonna read it out loud because I think it's super brilliant. This is what she says in the book. I am Éoman's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Be gone, if you be not deathless. For living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him. I love this line. The second cool thing she does in the battlefield is that she saves her uncle. In The Return of the King, Theoden is mortally wounded by the Witch King and passes away in Éowyn's arms. In the novel, however, Theoden passes away and from his injuries in Merry, and it's Merry who kind of holds him as he dies rather than Éowyn. And I find this sad because Theoden does not see that it is Éowyn who slays the Witch King, and he does not know that she rode into the battle. Like, he dies not knowing that, which, good thing, bad thing, I don't know. It's sad to think that her greatest achievement is missed by her king, who is also like kind of a father figure to her, and it's also somebody that she cared for when he was sick.
I know your face.
After the Battle of Pelennor Fields, Éowyn is among those who are seriously injured and who are taken to the houses of healing in Minas Tirith. This is where she is eventually healed by Aragorn, and it is during her time in the Houses of Healing that she kind of does some soul searching, and then like her physical and sort of emotional wounds get healed, and two things happen that I don't think she was expecting. You know, the war ends positively, like it's a victory, and the other positive thing that happens is that she meets a man who sees her as who she really is and who adores her. She meets Faramir. Faramir was also among the severely wounded who were healed by Aragorn. And it is during his time in the Houses of Healing that the two meet and that the two fall in love. One of the elements, there are many elements, but one of the elements that enables them to develop mutual understandings and a mutual understanding and admiration for each other, and eventually love, is that they pull each other through not only their physical pain but also their emotional pain. Remember that they both suffered deep losses. Éowyn lost her parents, she lost her cousin, she lost her uncle, and Faramir too, he lost his parents and he lost his brother. So they share that, and both Éowyn and Faramir are characters who are underestimated by the people around them, and they're seen as weak. Éowyn was told constantly that she can't fight because she's a woman, and of course Faramir was always trying to measure up to Boromir in Denethor's eyes. Another point that they have in common is that they are both willing to sacrifice a lot to protect the people they love. And on top of being strong, they are both very compassionate and gentle, so they're really an amazing pair for that. Another element that makes them so great to me is that it is through Faramir that Éowyn can find her own strength. Remember that when she had her crush on Aragorn, part of what drew her to him was that Aragorn would in a way be her savior. He would be her ticket. She saw him as a potential ticket out of Rohan and possibly a ticket into the battlefield. With Faramir though, it's different. With Faramir challenges her to find her own strength. And when she finds that strength, she softens and becomes a healer and ends up with a man who sees her as the unique person that she is. We get this in book 5 chapter 6, no, in book 6 chapter 5, and it's the chapter entitled The Steward and the King, and this is what she says. I really love this line. I stand in Minas Anor, the tower of the sun, and behold, the shadow has departed. I will be a Shieldmaiden no longer, nor vie with the great riders, nor take only joy in the songs of slaying. I will be a healer and love all things that grow and are not barren. I think I'm gonna end this video on this note. The more I read Tolkien, the more I'm fascinated by his female characters, because my goodness, the women he gives us can seriously hold their own weight, and you know, some of them give the male characters a run for their money. Like, I'm looking at Beren and Luthien, like, Beren, you're great, but Luthien, like, she's the badass in that story. Like, Éowyn is only a secondary character, but I hope that I've demonstrated in this video that she has plenty of depth, she's very likable, she's really relatable, and plays a very important role in the war against Sauron. So, if you have any thoughts, you know, just let me know in the comments below. And if you wish, like this video and subscribe to my channel. It really does help. Farewell.